Today, responding to my dear friends and colleagues' requests and interests from different countries, I would like to share my experience and my vision of the situation of Ukraine now. So, I'm Elena Karpova, the citizen of Ukraine, who has seen its fight for independence since it started in 1992 when it became the first official state that left the Soviet Union. I work as associate professor at university and I have PhD and I've done a lot of research in the system of higher education, but I've also had enough interest in history, cross-cultural communication management, and mass manipulation. So today we're going to talk about the phenomenon of Ukraine, and you will learn probably more and you will have more insight why this country is such a big deal today for the leading countries who cannot still find the solution to this Ukrainian conflict. And I don't know, and I hope that in the near future it will be found, but it is kind of complicated. And today we'll try to understand why. So I will talk just a few words about what happened to me, for example, on the 24th of February. I will give you some historic brief. We will talk a bit about liberalism and human rights in Ukraine and capitalism as well, and the economic situation at the moment in brief. So let's start with the 24th of February. So on this day, there and some time before that, there appeared information. It was approximately 2 weeks before the conflict that the embassy of Bangladesh and others recommended their citizens to leave Ukraine due to the increasing conflict between Russia and Ukraine. And the embassy said they were authorized to take Bangladeshi people through Poland. So Bengalis rushed to Poland and then further to Europe, and all the doors for them were open, probably for the first time in history. When I heard from my Bengali boyfriend about all this, I laughed myself, and because everything was quiet. He continued reading the message that please do not believe Ukrainians when they laugh, or do not take it seriously because it all happened in 2014. So everything was planned, and the embassies knew beforehand and sent urgent messages to their people to leave the country as soon as possible. Almost 3 months before the war, there were also talks in the Ukrainian society that women can join the military. We didn't know why it was at all discussed at that time. So on the 24th of February, the average Ukrainians knew almost nothing about what's going to happen. Nobody informed us. But politicians are politicians. Our people are rarely informed by our politicians what's going on in fact. For example, on St. Valentine's Day, on the 14th of February, just 10 days before the war, when foreigners started leaving their country and packaging their luggage, the president of Ukraine shared on Facebook a very loving photo with his wife smiling and saying that everything will be okay. He is a former comedian and successful businessman who gained his presidency making a very successful utopian film about a prosperous country, and it worked, everybody knows it. But now I never believe a word of what any politician on TV says or shares. That night, I had terrible war dreams. I woke up at 5 early morning because of 2 explosions that were not far from me near the airport. So my friends came to me at 7 and said to me that the war started officially. I left the apartment, went to my mom's house, took my things, just 2 bags, and left for Berlin with a strong belief that no one will care for you unless you do it yourself. No one, remember it. And presidents and governments and politicians have always their own priorities. You should always rely on God and yourself and make your own way. So never, never depend on government's hand. You are the one you own. So in fact, I could never imagine I would apply the word refugee on me. And it's so simple in this world today to become a refugee overnight. So I think that the best phrase that can kind of describe our young people is the one that you can see here on the slide from Remarque, who said, "We're not youth any longer. We don't want to take the world by storm. We're fleeing. We fly from ourselves, from our life. We were 18 and had begun to love life and the world, and we had to shoot it to pieces." I think there is nothing to add here, in fact. So, if to continue, let's talk a bit about some interesting historical facts, because, for example, I will not talk about the times when our ancestors were hunting in the forests or fishing, but anyway, I think you should know some interesting information about it. So, first of all, I would like to show you the map of Ukraine. And what you're going to see here is just the territory of current Ukraine. You can see from the map that it borders on Belarus and Russia in the north, and Poland and Romania and Hungary, Slovakia in the west. And this situation was not always. So it's only since 1992 there was such a division of the territory. And on this map, you can see that Crimea belongs to Ukraine. Even Russia took it back. And here I want to say that Ukraine was the first country that in 1992 left the Soviet Union out of 15. So you can imagine how courageous the people were of our government at that time to take this important step. So, but before it, there was a Soviet Union, everybody knows it. And here also on the slide, you can see the map. You know that the Soviet Union was a huge country, and it was under the Soviet Union from 1922 till 1991. So all these colored countries here belonged to the former Soviet Union. You can imagine the huge size of this country. And here was also Ukraine with Crimea as well. So what's important to mention here is that at that time, the USSR gifted Ukraine to celebrate 300-year anniversary of the Pereyaslav Treaty in 1954, the territory of the Crimea. So in 2014, Russia decided to take it back because it said it was theirs. But there is one but, what Russia forgets today, that before the Russians invaded it in 1783, there lived Crimean Tatar in the 13th and 14th centuries, and before them there lived the Tauri, the Scythians, the Sarmatians, the Greek who founded this city Chersonesus, the Goths, the Italians, the Turkish. So these nations can also say today, hey, come on, we lived here just before you came. Okay, the Tauri, the Scythians, the Sarmatians, we cannot ask because they do not exist anymore, so nobody to ask. But what about the Greek, the Italians, even the Mongols, scusi? So they can also appeal to their ancestors and move back to these territories again, but they behave in an intelligent way, even the Mongols. Yeah, even the Mongols. So if modern countries start politics like this, then we all in the world should come back to the territories of the medieval times or even earlier. But some states, like Babylon, do not exist today. So what to do then with these territories? It's absurd. Even the British finally stopped their conquering violent policy, but countries with autocratic governments still exist and are still doing this now. Of course, every country has its sovereignty, culture, and traditions, but no ruler has the right to invade and come as a barbarian to kill the people. So this situation was like this. But before the Soviet Union, there was the Russian Empire, and I will also share the map with you about the territory. So Ukraine, as you can see on the slide, was the part of the Russian Empire, only about 200 years. So you can see how huge the Russian Empire was. It was as big as the British Empire and as the Mongol Empire. So these three empires were the biggest in the world. So you can see how many countries were at the time, and their policy was also quite of expanding, and in my opinion also a bit aggressive, because sometimes they conquered the lands in fact they didn't own. So for example, the Russian Empire was fighting for Finland and the Baltic region with Sweden, for the Ukrainian lands with Poland, for the Crimea with the Ottoman Empire, for the Caucasus with Persia, for the Northern Asia with the British Empire, and for the Kazakh lands, with China. But that's why today Russia refers too much to their previous imperial lands. But Russia forgets the history probably, or pretend to. So, but before the Russian Empire, there was something else. There was another state. It was the Kievan Rus. So, if you have a look on the slide, you will get more information about that. Kievan Rus existed before the Russian Empire, and it consisted of the East Slavic tribes, its modern Ukrainians, Russians, and Belarusians, and the Finnish-Hungarian tribes under the Rurik dynasty. But all this big state was destroyed by the Mongols. That's why it was kind of mess for about 100 years after that. So there is a very interesting fact about the Kievan Rus. I want to share it with you. Is that when this huge old state was formed, probably a lot of politicians forget about it. It came from the north. So if you have a look at this map, in 862, the Kievan Rus, in fact, it was the Rus first, started from the northern part of Europe. So it was northern part, and in 862, the Kievan Rus as a state didn't exist at all. So there were tribes, of course, but the Rus as a state started from the north, far away from Kiev. What happened at that time is that as this territory was very vast and rich, but it was kind of mess in the ruling class. So in the chronicles from 862, the tale of bygone years, these Slavic and Finnish and Hungarian tribes asked the Varangian or Vikings, now Scandinavians, who lived here in the north to Europe, to rule them. So these Varangians or Scandinavians were called Rus. It was their name. And the Slavic nations said to them, so we have a great and rich land, but there is no order in it. Come to rule and possess us. And 3 men started ruling, and since then, the land was called the Rus. And later, when the lands expanded, their ancestor Oleg said that Kiev would be the mother of the Rus cities. So again, I want to share with you some interesting information. And you can learn more from the book I mentioned about the history of this part. So this is the tale of bygone years, and all this information was written here. And this is Vasnetsov's picture, the coming of the Varangians or Rus, when they asked them to be ruled by them. And in 988, the Vladimir the Great united and baptized the Rus, and it became Orthodox. So today, both politicians of both countries are fighting for the priority of owning the land. The Russians focus today on the borders that were only during the Russian Empire, while the Ukrainian politicians focus on the earlier time when the Kievan Rus was prosperous and Kiev was the center of this big state. So here, politicians sometimes try to make a trick. Because, for example, the Ukrainian politicians say that it all came from the Kiev Rus. In fact, the Rus came from the north first, before the Kievan Rus existed as a state. So Kiev became the part of the Rus a bit later, and it was expanding later. That's why Ukraine is often called Southern Rus or Mala Russia, that means small Russia. And at that time, the residency of Kiev church was evacuated to the Russian city because of the Mongols. And if it was not, then it could vanish from the Ukrainian earth forever. So the Russian politicians also forget that the name of their empire comes from the Scandinavic tribe, and that later Kiev, not Moscow, was chosen the main city of the Kiev Rus first. Plus, when Kiev was under the Mongol Empire, it was Danilo Galitsky, the first of one of the three appointed Tsars, who hid the Mongols and was appointed by the Pope as the king of Rus. So he was the first to rule. So the politicians today just found parts of history that are beneficial to them in their own ways. And of course, it's kind of manipulation, because in fact, they focus on absolutely the period of time that they need. In fact, the whole territory was kind of consisted of different tribes, of different nations, but they fought for the idea to be independent, all of them, both those who lived in the territory of modern Ukraine and in the territory of Russia. They didn't want to be slaves, of course. That's it. And the next thing to talk about in this part, it's about liberalism and human rights in Ukraine. So you know that liberalism started in the 17th century, then it started flourishing in the 18th, 19th centuries, and in the territory of modern Ukraine, so we can have a look. It was not a lot about liberalism because, for example, until 1905, there could be no open political parties in Russia. Society had a liberal current that strove for a peaceful transformation of the state system on the basis of political freedom. And in the Soviet times, within 70 years, you can imagine that socialism and capitalism ruled over liberalism. The society was far above the needs of an individual. So only today, when Ukraine got its independence, liberalism has become one of the leading ideologies, both in Ukraine and in the world. And talking about liberalism, for example, in the Soviet times, there was no place for it because the ideology served more for the interests of the society than and public interest than for the interests of private ones or individuals. So personal freedom was not the priority of the government. And this, of course, led to different restrictions on the personal freedom of citizens. So they lost their private property, they lost their freedom to live in the place they wanted, to work in the place they wanted. They were appointed to work where the government would say to them with low salary usually. And for example, when the Soviet authorities have come to my ancestors who lived at that time in Dnipropetrovsk region of Ukraine. They were quite wealthy, and the Soviet government took everything from my family, made them work in this kolkhoz for the needs of the public welfare. And some of my relatives didn't agree with that. And one of them, whose name was Danila, he was sent to prison for that, to the north, far away, for hard work there, and probably he died there. So there was no liberalism and no humanity at the time, just rude and violent policy. And today, of course, traditional values of Ukrainian liberalism are labor, truth, and freedom. And the Liberal Party of Ukraine is the first liberal party of the former Soviet countries recognized by a liberal international as one that meets international criteria of political liberalism. So concepts of personal freedom, self-respect, universal human rights, religious tolerance, privacy, private property, free market equality, rule of law, and so on are the most widespread today. But one thing in this respect, I want to say, in my opinion, whatever system you choose, none of them would be perfect. None, because by nature we are all different. We all have different needs and wants and interests and personal benefits. So whatever system is implemented, it will be imperfect because humans are imperfect. So how the system of millions imperfect humans can be perfect? So the answer is obvious, it will not, never. So plus we don't need to forget about the question of survival. So if you make all men and women equal and free in everything, competition, that is the inner instinct to survive, will remain anyway. Of course, you may say that, come on, but we need some kind of system because we will be just a mass of humans. Of course, we can choose any system that we want. We can give any name to the system, but you will never be satisfied with the system. And plus, it can be also destructive. So the final thing here to discuss is a few words about capitalism and modern situation of Ukraine and its economy. So the next thing is talking about capitalism. So many business people and influential people in this world, leaders of corporations and companies, believe that capitalism has exhausted itself. So today we live in a post-capitalistic environment. Even in 2020, Schwab and Mahler published a book, The Great Reset, where they were talking about dying capitalism and that there needs something to be done, and that we should make a new mass of people able to serve the needs of post-capitalist society, industry, I don't know. So capitalism in the Soviet times was not in a favor because it was more communism. So it was not the ideology of the Soviet government. But today, capitalism started its developing in Ukraine, but it has not been successful, as many economists believe. And anyway, the world itself and Ukraine also, they just turned out to be in the situation of post-capitalism, they want it or not. Of course, we can talk a lot about the advantages and disadvantages of capitalism, but in Ukraine it was kind of in a weird form since 1992 because the level of population decreased from 52 million in 1991 to 45 million in 2014. The number of children decreased, the number of retired people decreased, and the retirement age increased. And plus, some economists believe that Ukraine has also been a part of the periphery of the world economy. And it was and Ukraine was poor not because there were stupid people and in the West they are all smart, no, just because it was not on the top of the economic system, and that's why the economic situation was bad and human rights are worse than in developed country. So such a hierarchical structure of the world economy, and capitalism needs a hierarchy. So it gave a little chance for Ukraine to be able to catch up with the countries of the center of the world economy in its development. So attempts to catch up and overtake the West have been made by African countries, for example, in 1960s, but the gap between them and developed countries has grown and continues growing steadily. And the same situation of growing economic inequality has developed in relations between India and the UK. So Ukraine will ever be able to catch up with the Western countries within the framework of the existing world system. And unfortunately, adding to this, all this power since 1992 often went to the wrong hands that were unable to do something with all this government property and make a cool business out of it. It was in the hands of and interests of oligarchs and probably bandits. And that's why the result is what we have now. And the next thing is that Ukrainian capitalism created a real threat to democracy, freedom, and human rights. And the new government tried to implement a bulk of very cool reforms, but of course it needs time. So in the modern world, not only Ukraine, but all the European leading countries face the crisis of this capitalist world system. They are searching for alternatives because it's not an easy thing to be done. So we will see what system will be chosen in the near future. And as for the situation in Ukraine in the field of economy, I wouldn't talk a lot. You can just search all this information on the website of the World Bank, where you can find a report about the recent economic situation in Ukraine. And of course, all the leaders talk that this crisis will have a great impact on the countries in the West and in the East. And it is estimated that Ukraine's economy will lose about and will drop at 45% this year. And the same Russia's economy will suffer a bit. And you know that Russia and Ukraine account for about 40% of wheat imports in the region, and about 75% or more in Central Asia and South Caucasus. So all the detailed information you can see on their website. And in conclusion, I would like to say the following, that unfortunately, Ukraine has always been a battlefield between the West and the East, and about 7 million people fled from Ukraine. And it's also a big sign. It, of course, doesn't mean that all these people don't want to fight, but it also doesn't mean that people want to fight, because people understand that the power of Russia is enormous. I mean, in the military equipment and everything. So, and plus, we are millennials. We are the generation that do not want to fight. We don't want wars. We want to live in peace. We want to live nice. We want to live rich. We want to have an interesting life. We want to have friends worldwide, in the West and in the East. And we just want to make friendship. But not all this what's going on now. So today we can see revolutions worldwide in Ukraine, Afghanistan, Sri Lanka, but those who organize and sponsor these revolutions, they of course take full responsibility on themselves, even if they do it with the hands of other people. But it's kind of their business, and it can be often a disaster. It can be often a disaster because if you change the DNA of the country, it would never be the same country as it was before. And this intrusion into the biological process and life of the country as an organism can be disastrous. Because, yes, countries have faces, have characters, and their lifestyle. And this physical or mental intrusion can sometimes be good, but sometimes cannot be good. And in the end, I want to show you one of the symbols of Ukraine. It's probably, it's not only the blue and yellow, yes, flag, but it's also the sunflower. So the sunflower is a great symbol of Ukraine, because it means the desire to live, the desire to be happy. It means that you should be strong, you should survive, and it absolutely characterizes the Ukrainian people. And plus, it's a unique flower because it's not one flower, as you can see on the slide, but it consists of 1,000 small flowers inside that produce a nice crop. So, like, all in one and one in all, like our people today. So stay safe and try to spread love, to spread freedom, to spread human rights, and do whatever you can wherever you are today, for the future, for the best of all our nations, because it's all our planet, and we want it or not, we are connected together. So take care and goodbye. Thanks for watching me.